The history of abstraction in Colorado is important because our state has made major contributions to the international movement and is still making them, as a matter of fact.
With the rise of the Nazis in Europe, you have the modern artists from not just Germany, but France and Italy and the other countries of Europe coming to America, taking professorships and teaching jobs at universities, colleges, and art schools.
After the war, there was this sense of prosperity and exuberance and let's do something different.
And this encourages a widespread embrace of European-based abstraction.
You know, it was like a veil was lifted and abstraction really started shining through.
Interestingly enough, Colorado, and especially in Colorado Springs, there would develop an abstract movement.
The dramatic Colorado landscape began to be portrayed with referential abstractions in the 1930s and the 1940s.
We focus in Colorado, I think, on landscape, and that's what the history of art in the state is made up of, the Rockies, of these world-famous views. But parallel to that, and starting in the 1930s, you have this interest in abstracting the scenery and then finally arriving at pure abstraction.
This gave a wonderful regional cast to the paintings. Plunging into pure abstraction in the 1930s in Colorado was Denver artist Lyle McQuarrie. We don't have paintings of a lot of these artists, but the ones that we know about in the 1940s were, for instance, Jack Ball in Denver and George Cecil Carter in Colorado Springs.
There develops more or less American abstraction, which is abstract expressionism. But it comes out of these Europeans.
The Bauhaus artist Herbert Bayer took up residence in Aspen in 1946, stayed 29 years until his heart condition compelled his move to California. While at the Bauhaus in the 1920s, he had done surrealism and abstraction and carried that into Colorado. Another Bauhaus artist, Werner Dreves, worked in Colorado on and off. Hungarian-born Roland Detrick moved to New York from France and Switzerland in 1950. And then he moved to Denver in 1952. Very fortunate to have him. He also brought a European artistic sensibility to Colorado, along with Herbert Bayer.
Up here in Denver, you had Vance Kirkland, who is one of the most important artists to have ever worked in Colorado in any genre. And he embraced abstraction in the mid-1950s. And so you have this established sensibility for abstraction.
The invention of media and techniques by Colorado artists have been a contribution to American art.
Abstraction, painting, sculpture, the mind opened up.
So all this and much more happened in Colorado because artists were and wished to be isolated from New York in many cases. They were therefore mostly overlooked, but they left a legacy for America.
Again, I refer to this painting by Magritte. It says in French, beneath the pipe, this is not a pipe. Essentially, all art is abstract.
When you're confronted with abstraction, you try to, it's like looking at the clouds. You go, oh, that cloud looks like Mickey Mouse. It's the same way when you're looking at abstraction.
While a picture can give us an image of the way the world looks, abstraction can kind of help us see how the world feels.
I feel like abstraction is a visual language where each artist creates their own vocabulary.
Pure abstraction is just simply lines, color, texture. Referential abstraction is a painting or a sculpture or a print which refers to something the subject is abstracted. But it's still, you can tell what it refers to.
And historically, it's been reductive abstraction. So you abstract from the world, which means you take something and then you reduce it to find a kind of truth in it.
But I have had a problem understanding what is meant by abstraction anyway. but there's also non-objective painting. And my argument is no paintings are non-objective.
To me, abstraction's that kind of surrendering to the unknown and just accepting that, you can pretend to be in control as much as you want, but it's always nature, it's always the universe, whatever you want to call it.
In additive abstraction, you don't start with the world. You take parts of the world and you bring them together, and then you see what's possible in those things coming together. So the abstraction happens prior to the making.
I always thought there had been enough people painting people. So when I started making art, I tried to make non-verbal communication.
Everything in my life, the way I see is, to me, is abstract. It depends how you see, how you define.
Robert Irwin said, "Seeing is forgetting the name of what one sees."
A lot of what I do is a distillation of ideas, qualities and characteristics of material or a site or a particular experience.
That term has a different meaning to me in that I've been trying for years to make the most realistic sculpture I can, but it's called abstraction or non-objective. It's real materials, it's real form, it's real space. It's as real as I can make it.
Vance Kirkland came to Denver in 1929. He moved here from Ohio, as a matter of fact, and was doing referential abstraction by 1947. He had previously had an extensive career of surrealism, which is why he was so late going into abstraction. He created his first pure abstraction in 1951. Another aspect of Kirkland's career is responsible for much of the respect for his art, and that is his invention of three unique media. He was a master watercolor painter for many, many years. In 1950, he started mixing watercolor and denatured alcohol, which gave him a fascinating texture, but he wasn't totally satisfied with that. So in 1953, he began mixing water and oil paint, which gave him a much more increased texture. And he really used that for the rest of his life until he died in 1981. However, in 1963, he came up with another unique technique, which was applying dots of colors to his paintings. He used wooden dowels and placed the dots mostly on top of the oil paint and water mixtures. So then those two layers are on top of the first layer, which is a gradation background of color done with oil paint. Tremendously three-dimensional effects that Kirkland could achieve by doing that. He had to do the paintings flat on a table. So he suspended straps over the table and he laid across the straps to be able to do the paintings. Even when he began to do the dots on top of the oil and water mixtures, he also had to have the paintings flat because the dots would run if the paintings weren't flat. Kirkland also had a major effect on artists from his teaching. That began when he founded the present-day School of Art at the University of Denver in early 1929. He also founded the Kirkland School of Art in 1932, then the School of Art at the University of Colorado at Denver in 1933. So by 1933, he was 28 years old and he had founded 3 art schools, but also, and a big fantastic credit to Kirkland, was he was simultaneously forging his own art career. Kirkland managed to have 3 major painting periods and invent about 35 series, an astounding 35 series, during his career. After Kirkland's death, his abstractions have attracted much more attention in and outside Colorado. Kirkland's works have been given 13 European exhibitions, 11 at museums, and in 10 countries. So Kirkland really has brought a considerable amount of attention to the state of Colorado's history.
In terms of just the spaces and the light that's on the Western US and the landscape, that's had a huge impact on me for sure.
The abstract expressionists of the 50s talked about how so many of them came from the West. And I think that's absolutely true, that the expansiveness and the boldness of their work came from living in the West and seeing the landscape as it exists out here.
Being in Colorado, nature, the mountains, and in particular the amount of sunlight has really affected my work. I am really interested in patterns in nature, and in particular light patterns.
I'm very attracted to the West. I think that there's a pioneer spirit that even after all these years still sort of drives people.
Growing up in Wyoming, there wasn't much to do, and it was pretty sparse and open, and so you really had to use your imagination.
Growing up near ocean and living in near mountains, the sense of space, I like the kind of opposite.
I have a really strong relationship with the landscape in Colorado. All of my initial drawings, or sometimes I use photographs now, they all come from the landscape.
I think it changed as soon as I moved here. I think the landscape, the mountains especially. I remember when I came here, it was a turning point for me.
The West has always been wide open, if you will, space-wise and psychologically, open to experimentation, to sort of explorers, people seeking adventure, the mountains, the desert. I knew or had a sense that the area was special.
When I came to Colorado, I looked at the mountains. Oh my gosh, there they are. It's an object.
I find there's an interesting sort of history here that relates to abstraction. I think the acquisition and the building of the Clifford Still Museum, also the Kirkland Museum, drew and draws now people who are interested in that history. So I think that Denver as a place, outside of just, beautiful landscape that is Colorado, is, for me anyway, an influence.
I wanted to find a mode of expression that allowed for discovery and exploration, as opposed to making statements. I wanted to find out more about myself and the world that I live in.
There's the word chromaxiologic, and it is my own word. Chroma relating to color, and axiology is actually a word that has to do with moral values. And I bent that to be color values. The quasi-crystal, as I discovered it in 1970, is actually a shadow from the sixth dimension.
Specifically, when my father died, I wanted to paint, and I needed to work through some of that stuff. I needed to go to something that was more profound and deeper and more complex.
I feel like I'm not a composer, I'm an arranger. I'm taking everyday shapes, forms, architectural phrases, repositioning them, and at the same time using a constructivist phrasing of materials having an integrity of their own. I actually feel like I'm a realist who speaks in the language of abstraction.
You'll see my paintings and they'll be kind of like this charcoal dance or something. Like you'll see them and they're sort of an amalgamation of different movements that I've made on the canvas, and it's really drawing. It's something in between drawing and painting.
I like getting my hands dirty. I like touching the material that I'm working with. I create with my hands as much as I do with my eyes and my brain, really.
I worked in dirt. I actually buried the canvases outside in dirt. And that was kind of a metaphor for me, because the earth is the place where everything begins and where everything ends up to me.
I make art because I love beautiful things. They're all about beauty and color and inspiration, making people happy.
The objects are the way to transcend the absolute.
And a lot of the elements from one piece translates into another, whether it's the positive or negative space, or how the the pieces rise up or span a plane horizontally.
There's a lot of like creating and destroying at the same time. I like that idea of something that's aged or been there forever.
I think it's more personal, and I think it connects to the cosmos.